welcome back to Book Break. In this video I'm going to recommend a bunch of books from within one of my favourite subgenres, and that is books with a touch of magic. So what do I mean by this? These kind of books can range from being speculative fiction to literary fiction with a touch of something unusual going on, all the way to the edges of fantasy. And fantasy, of course, is a huge genre in its own right. At one end you have books that are set in totally other worlds, and people love this kind of rich world building, being transported somewhere totally new. And at the other extreme you have fantasy books that are set in a place that is recognisably our world, but with a touch of magic thrown in. So that is the kind of area where I'm going to stay in this video. So to start with a book that I very recently read and loved, The Minuscule Mansion of Myra Malone by Audrey Burgess. I had to try several takes to get that out. I love the alliteration. Kind of hard to say on camera. This is a story about a woman who lives most of her life within this one attic room. For many years she has been afraid to leave her house, but within her attic room she has created this whole world. She has a miniature dollhouse which she is constantly creating new little miniature items of furniture for and rearranging it. And she writes a blog which has developed this huge following of people who are obsessed with her miniature dollhouse. What her followers don't know about the dollhouse is it is actually magical, because what Myra Malone, who is our main character, finds is that sometimes in the night the rooms just appear or disappear. She can have spent days creating little bits of furniture, arranging a room, only to find that overnight it totally vanishes, is swallowed up into the dollhouse, and a new empty room has appeared in its place. And this has been going on ever since she was a child and first inherited the doll's house. So she keeps the magical element of the dollhouse secret from her followers, but she shows them all of the incredible things that she does with it, and people send her little miniatures that they want to see being put into the doll's house. It's got this real cult following. Across the country, a young man called Alex has never heard of this blog before. He runs a furniture store, and one day some customers come in talking about the doll's house, and so he's really intrigued. He looks it up and is bowled over to discover that this doll's house looks exactly like his real house, down to having the same furniture in the rooms. The bedroom in this doll's house is his bedroom. So he of course writes to Myra Malone to find out what is going on, and the story then follows them unravelling this magical mystery of what is the history behind this doll's house. I thought this book was so sweet, so lovely. It's got all these elements of folklore, so we go back quite far in time and discover the kind of magical history that has gone into this doll's house. A lot of the book is actually about family and loneliness. Both Myra and Alex have these pretty sad family histories, and through the doll's house bringing them together they are able to discover a different kind of family. It's also a love story, and a very sweet one at that. So I really recommend this book as a lovely novel with a touch of magic that will surprise and delight you. Another book that I read and loved recently is The First Bright Thing by J.R. Dawson. This is a book that fits further into the fantasy side of things, but is still recognisably set in at least a world that resembles our own. And this is a historical fantasy, and I thought it was so much fun. It is set in a circus, and it is between the world wars. This circus is made up of a group of people who each mysteriously developed sparks, which are these magical powers that suddenly started appearing across the world during the First World War. All of their sparks are slightly different. It might be the ability to travel through time, it might be the ability to draw pictures in the air, it might be the ability to heal people. Each of them were given some power that reflected what they needed at that time, and the sparks have not left. So now they have formed this circus and they go around enchanting audiences in different towns across the United States, and in each town they identify someone in the audience who needs them the most that night, and they use their magical spark to give that person what they most need. All of the characters within the circus are so well written. You really get to know and love all of their different personalities and their different magical powers, and at the centre there is a queer love story. So the ringmaster, known as Rin, travels with her wife Odette, and their love story is so beautiful. But, so what seems like on the one level it could be this lovely, light, magical story of found family and hope, has a dark side, a very, very dark side, and this book gets terrifying. So Rin's power is that she can jump through time, and when she goes into the future, she sees that something terrifying is coming. And we, as a reader knowing history, know that what is coming is the Second World War. Everyone in the book thinks that they have just escaped from the worst war that could ever possibly happen to them, and Rin is realizing that something potentially even worse is coming, and can she do anything to stop it? So that's kind of the main driving force behind the plot. Rin is also haunted by her past. The Circus King is this terrifying, shadowy figure from her past who is never going to let her go. We get a parallel timeline that we jump back and forth between, kind of filling in some of the gaps, building in the puzzle pieces, and those sections are honestly nightmare-inducing. This book has some of the most terrifying scenes I've ever seen, but that juxtaposition between the really lovely light elements and the very, very dark elements is brilliant. It's so well done. So this is perhaps more than a touch of magic. This book is all about magic, but because it is set so recognisably in our world, in our history, it feels very relevant to our present. And while we're further over into that fantasy space, A Marvellous Light is the first book in the Last Binding series by Freya Marske, and this is a really good kind of gateway into fantasy, I would say, because again, it is set in a world that we recognise. It's just that there is magic secretly in that world. So this could be our life and we just don't know about the magic. This is historical fantasy. It's about this rich baronet called Robin who gets a new job in Parliament, but by some mistake he ends up being given the job of magical liaison, and he did not even know that magic was real, and suddenly he is the kind of correspondent with the magical counterpart of our government. He ends up having to work together with Edwin, who is his magical counterpart, to unravel this dangerous conspiracy. And it is a romance, and it gets very sweet and very steamy, and it was so much fun. And there's more in the series as well. Each book in the series follows a different pairing, so you have lots of different couples to fall in love with. They're all wonderfully queer and wonderfully magical. Moving further back away from fantasy into time travel, another of my favourite subgenres, I have the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series here, and I will link below to a video that I've made here before on Book Break all about books about time travel, because there are a lot of them that are brilliant. But let's talk about these. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi is set in a cafe in Tokyo, an ordinary seeming cafe. It's just that visitors to this cafe have the ability to go back in time. It's very, very strict. There are many rules that visitors to the cafe have to learn, mostly that you can't change anything when you travel through time, you have to sit in a particular seat in the cafe in order to move, and you can't get up from your seat. So you can't travel around through time, you can only really meet people who have already previously been to the cafe. The time travelling starts when a particular waitress pours your cup of coffee, and you must return to the present before the coffee gets cold. Another video that I should link you to is a video I made all about this series where I describe all of that in even more detail, so I will also link to that below as well. Each book is made up of 4 little vignettes about different visitors to the cafe, telling their story of why they have decided to travel through time, usually into the past, sometimes into the future, and they're usually heartbreaking but very, very sweet. The customers know that they cannot change anything, and so instead travelling through time is generally for them about coming to terms with something, with a loss, with a regret. They do conversations over again. They come to terms with things that they got wrong, and then they return to the present and they know that nothing has changed, but the cafe has helped them in some way. So that's 4 gorgeous books in this series so far, including my proof here of book number 4, which is coming out later this year, and it's called Before We Say Goodbye, so I'm already predicting I'm gonna cry. The Cat Who Saved Books by Sasuke Natsukawa has a touch of magic in the form of a talking cat. cat. This talking cat is called Tiger, and Tiger appears to a boy just when he needs him the most. So Rintaro is our main character, a boy who absolutely loved the secondhand bookshop that was created by his grandfather. It was his favourite place on earth to spend hours, and after the death of his grandfather he is devastated, alone, and faced with having to close the beloved bookshop. And that's when Tiger appears, this talking cat who needs Rintaro to help him go on a mission. 3 missions, in fact, to save books from people who have mistreated them. So this also fits well within one of my other favourite subgenres, which is books about books. I have a video for that too, I will link to that below as well, and I would argue that books about books are kind of the same as books with a touch of magic, because we all know the magical powers that books hold. And The Cat Who Saved Books is very much about that special magic that books hold, but also the more explicit magic of a talking cat, of course. Blackwaters Sister by Zencho is about a girl called Jess who is moving back with her family to Malaysia, a country that Jess has not been back to since she was a toddler. And while she's preparing for this move, she starts hearing a voice in her head. And it turns out she's not imagining it. The voice is actually the ghost of Jess's late grandmother, who wants Jess to help her on a mission to avenge a deity, the Blackwaters Sister. So the Blackwaters Sister was the deity that Jess's grandmother served, and who has been offended by a business magnate. And so Jess's grandmother, who by the way is very bossy, is determined that Jess is going to help her get revenge. So it's a really fun book. It's got this contemporary storyline as well. Jess has got her own stuff to work out, for example figuring out how to talk to her parents about her sexuality, about the fact that she has a girlfriend, but all at the same time she's being sucked into this magical world of goddesses and ghosts. So it's a really fun combination. And talking of ghosts, Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens is a historical fiction novel narrated by a ghost. A queer teenage ghost, in fact, who lives in a monastery, who has lived there for many centuries, observing the people who have lived there over the years. And in 1838, it is Chopin and his lover George Sand who have come to this monastery. And Blanca, who is our teenage ghost narrator, has become infatuated with George. George is a figure unlike any that Blanca has seen in her many years of haunting this monastery. She is a woman who wears men's clothes. She loves men and women alike. She is a passionate writer, and Blanca is obsessed with her. I thought this book was gorgeous, like totally exquisite. It's a historical fiction novel about this real visit that Chopin did take to this monastery with George Sand that went wrong. And so I learned a lot about the real history there that I had known nothing about. But it is this really unusual narrator that gives the book such a new twist. Devotion is another queer, slightly supernatural story. It's another historical fiction, and the book hints right from the beginning that ghosts are going to come into this story, but you don't know exactly how or when. All I will tell you is that it's about 2 teenage girls making a very dangerous journey with their families. A whole community has had to leave their home in what was at the time known as Prussia for reasons of religious persecution, and they have set off on this long, dangerous journey by boat to Australia. The 2 teenage girls are called Hannah and Thea, and they have fallen in love, although they don't necessarily know the word for that feeling, not living in a time when they would have known how to describe that. But it's a really beautiful love story between these girls, and it's a real tearjerker as well, because as I said, the book goes somewhere a little otherworldly, and it's a story about queer longing and grief, and it made me absolutely weep. And finally, The Clockmakers Daughter by Kate Morton, which is such a clever book. It's got Kate Morton's trademark style of having parallel timelines, this time lots of them, so you jump through so many different generations of people and families whose lives have intersected with this one grand house. From 1862 all the way up to present day, we meet so many different people who have visited Birchwood Manor. And the whole thing is narrated by this seemingly otherworldly presence who has somehow watched over all of these different generations. So it's a book, if you love Kate Morton's books, you are going to love this one. It's one of my favourites of all of hers. I believe it is the only one that brings in this little touch of magic, so that sets it a little bit apart from her others. So that was quite a range of books, from literary fiction to historical fiction to fantasy, all with a touch of magic, some with bigger doses than others, but all of which will take you away from our world in some small way into somewhere else a little bit more magical. So I love all of these books, and I hope that you do as well. I will link to all the videos I talked about below, but I will also link you to a video I made. If you like books that are slightly magical, then you will also like books that are slightly supernatural. So I will link here to a video I made. I filmed it in my parents' attic about books that are slightly supernatural. It was terrifying to film because the attic is definitely haunted with spiders, if not with ghosts. So click through and watch that to make it worth my terrifying time, and I'll see you next time.